Once upon a time, there lived a beautiful princess named Snow White. She lived in a grand castle with her cruel stepmother, who was envious of Snow White's beauty and wanted her dead. Despite her harsh circumstances, Snow White remained kind, gentle, and caring. She often spent her days helping those in need and making friends with the animals in the forest surrounding the castle. One day, Snow White decided to run away from the castle and venture into the forest to escape her stepmother's wrath. As she walked through the dense forest, she stumbled upon a clearing and saw 3 little pigs building their houses. The first little pig had built his house out of straw, the second little pig had built his house out of sticks, and the third little pig had built his house out of bricks. Snow White approached the little pigs and asked if she could stay with them for a while. The 3 little pigs, being kind-hearted and compassionate, agreed to let Snow White stay with them. That night, the wicked stepmother found out that Snow White was in the forest and sent a huntsman to bring back Snow White's heart as proof of her death. The huntsman reached the first little pig's house made of straw and found Snow White inside. Snow White and the little pig managed to escape, and they fled to the second little pig's house made of sticks. However, the wicked stepmother's henchman burned down the second little pig's house, and Snow White and the little pigs had to flee once again. Finally, they reached the third little pig's house made of bricks, and the little pig refused to let Snow White leave. The wicked stepmother and her henchman tried to break down the door, but it wouldn't budge. Snow White and the 3 little pigs were safe from the wicked stepmother's wrath. Days passed, and Snow White and the little pigs became the best of friends. They laughed, played, and sang songs together. They went on adventures in the forest, and Snow White taught the little pigs how to dance and read. The little pigs, in turn, taught Snow White about the importance of hard work and determination. One day, as they were out exploring, they stumbled upon a prince from a neighboring kingdom who was passing through the forest. The prince was struck by Snow White's beauty and asked for her hand in marriage. Snow White agreed, and they got married in a grand ceremony. The wicked stepmother was not invited to the wedding, and Snow White lived happily ever after with her prince and her 3 little pig friends. The 3 little pigs continued to build houses for people all over the kingdom, and they became known as the best builders in all the land. Snow White and her prince had many children, and they lived in peace and prosperity. Snow White's kindness and compassion inspired everyone she met, and she became known as the fairest and kindest queen in all the land. Years passed, and Snow White's stepmother died. Snow White forgave her stepmother and prayed for her soul. The story of Snow White and the 3 little pigs was passed down from generation to generation, and it became a fairy tale that was loved by all. It taught people about the importance of friendship, bravery, and forgiveness. It showed that even in the darkest of times, there is always hope and that kindness can overcome even the cruelest of hearts. Snow White and the 3 little pigs lived on in people's hearts, and their story continued to be told for centuries to come. Snow White and the prince continued to rule the kingdom with kindness and justice, and their kingdom flourished. Their children grew up to be kind, brave, and determined and went on to rule their own kingdoms with the same values their parents had instilled in them. Snow White and her prince lived long and happy lives, and their legacy lived on through their descendants. Years went by, and the kingdom of Snow White and her prince became known as the fairest kingdom in all the land. People came from far and wide to visit and see the beauty and prosperity that flourished in the kingdom. The 3 little pigs continued to build houses, and they became known as the greatest builders in all the land. They passed on their knowledge and skills to their children, and their children's children, and their houses became known as the strongest and sturdiest in all the land. As time passed, Snow White and the prince became old, and they knew that it was time for them to pass on the kingdom to their children. Snow White and her prince called a great council and invited all the kings and queens from neighboring kingdoms to come and hear their plans. Snow White and her prince announced that they would pass on the kingdom to their youngest son, who was kind, just, and brave, and that he would continue to rule with the same values that they had lived by. The council was amazed by the wisdom and compassion of Snow White and her prince, and they all agreed that Snow White's youngest son would be the perfect ruler for the kingdom. Snow White and her prince passed on the kingdom to their son, and they retired to a peaceful life in the countryside. Snow White and her prince lived the rest of their lives surrounded by the love and care of their family and friends. They passed away peacefully in their sleep, and their kingdom mourned their loss. But Snow White and her prince's legacy lived on through their descendants, who continued to rule the kingdom with kindness and justice, and through the story of Snow White and the Three Little Pigs, which was passed down from generation to generation and continued to inspire people with its messages of friendship, bravery, and forgiveness. And so, Snow White and the Three Little Pigs lived on in the hearts and minds of people, as a reminder of the power of kindness, courage, and determination. Their story continued to be told for generations to come, and it would always be remembered as one of the greatest fairy tales of all time. The kingdom of Snow White and her prince lived on as a shining example of what could be achieved through kindness and compassion, and it continued to flourish and prosper for centuries to come. As the kingdom prospered, the Three Little Pigs became respected members of the community, known for their wisdom and their fair dealings with others. They built their own successful businesses and became well-respected members of the community. They were often called upon to give advice to young entrepreneurs and builders, and their words of wisdom were always valued. One day, a young man approached the Three Little Pigs and asked for their advice. He told them that he was a builder, just like them, but he was having trouble finding work. The Three Little Pigs listened carefully to the young man's story and decided to take him under their wing. They taught him the ins and outs of building, and he soon became a skilled builder in his own right. The young man was grateful for the help and support that he received from the Three Little Pigs, and he became a loyal friend to them. He also became a respected member of the community, and his business flourished. He was known for his honesty and fairness, and people often came to him for advice and help. As the years went by, the young man became an important part of Snow White's kingdom, and he was trusted by the king and queen to help them with important projects. He was a true asset to the kingdom, and his contributions were greatly appreciated by all. One day, the kingdom was threatened by an evil sorcerer who was determined to destroy it. The sorcerer had an army of dark creatures at his command, and he was determined to take over the kingdom and make it his own. Snow White, the prince, and the Three Little Pigs knew that they had to work together to defeat the sorcerer and protect the kingdom. The young man offered to help, and he rallied a group of brave builders to fight alongside him. Together, they built a massive wall around the kingdom, and they also built several towers that could be used to look out for the enemy. Snow White, the prince, and the Three Little Pigs led the charge against the sorcerer, and they fought with bravery and determination. In the end, the kingdom was saved, and the sorcerer was defeated. Snow White and her prince were hailed as heroes, and the Three Little Pigs were honored for their bravery and wisdom. The young man was also celebrated, and he was recognized for his contributions to the kingdom. He went on to become a successful builder and a respected member of the community. And so, Snow White and the Three Little Pigs lived on in the hearts and minds of people, as a reminder of the power of friendship, bravery, and determination. Their story continued to be told for generations to come, and it would always be remembered as one of the greatest fairy tales of all time. The kingdom of Snow White and her prince lived on as a shining example of what could be achieved through kindness and compassion, and it continued to flourish and prosper for centuries to come. The end.